I'm going to show you a super simple way to implement a P2P multiplayer game with only Steam's network. And the crazy part about it is that we won't have to rewrite any of the code or implementation that we've done over the last couple weeks. Now, if you haven't been following along, I took Brackeys' first Godot project and converted it into a multiplayer game. And then we looked at how to make a dedicated server. So if you haven't yet, go watch those videos. And since we're using Steam, you'll have to have 2 separate accounts on 2 separate computers. And if you don't have that, that could be a really big problem if you're trying to develop out your P2P game, right? You need that extra account to be able to test at least one other player in your game. Well, what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to use Godot's built-in high-level multiplayer APIs like Spawner, Synchronizer, and RPCs to set up your multiplayer game. And then when you're ready, you just flip the switch of the implementation to the Steam network, and all of that will just work. It should just work without any other changes to that. Now, this is all in theory, as this solution is still in early development. I think it's in alpha, but it's a really exciting look at the amazing things to come with Godot. And I'll touch on more about this at the end of the video. Let's just get started. So to get started, go ahead and clone the multiplayer project that I have out there, and I'll put the link down in the description. The library we're going to be using today is under the GodotSteam project. So if you head over to the introduction area, and you can see here that there are a bunch of different downloads and plugins and extensions and all this stuff, and we don't really need to get into that today. And one thing we want to make sure that we download is go under the MultiplayerPeer builds and select this first version here. And depending on which type of computer you have, whether it's Mac OS or Windows or Linux, go ahead and download that zip file, and also download this templates folder here as well and put it somewhere where you can reference it. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And just so you know, the GodotSteam project is a fully functional Steam API written just for Godot. It has basically a one-to-one mapping of everything that you would need for Steam, and you can download it as an extension from Godot. So if we go over to our Godot project, and if you hit the asset lib tab and just type in Steam, they have 3 or 4 downloads that you can add to your project. So the one you'll actually need if you don't want to use this solution that we're going to look at, and you just want to get started with GodotSteam in general, just go ahead and download this one, or whichever, depending on which version you have. There's a 4.0 or a 4.1.4.2. Just pick whichever version is applicable to you, to your Godot version. They also offer a server version, like if you want to run in a dedicated server or anonymously for Steam. And also there is a plugin version of what we're going to look at today, which is called SteamMultiplayerPeer. I haven't played around with that too much yet. I wasn't able to get it up and running, but this is an alternative approach to today's setup, but I'm not going to dig into that too much today at all. So because this solution has a little bit of a special setup, we're not going to use any extensions today. We're actually going to use a full-on different build of the Godot editor. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute, so just keep that in mind. So if you have the game cloned and you're running it, go ahead and close it. We need to open it with that custom build that we just downloaded. Because I'm on a Mac, this is what it looks like for me, but if you're on a Windows machine, it'll probably look similar to this. Once you have it open, hit the import button, and we are going to import the project that we just cloned. So click first game, and then there's your Godot project, and hit open, import and edit. And before we continue, double check that it's the correct version by going under the Godot About Godot tab, and you'll notice that it'll say 4.22 stable custom. So you want to make sure it says that custom build. So we know we're at version 4.2, but we're in the custom version that contains the libraries that we need. Now, what are the libraries? So this build of Godot will have the baked in libraries of GodotSteam and also SteamMultiplayerPeer. And let's just do a quick test run to make sure that we have a good solid starting point. So hit debug. We're going to run 2 instances, hit play, and we'll host a new game and join as player 2. And as you can see, we have a nice little simple multiplayer game. Okay, so that's where we left off in the last couple videos, so we know we have a good starting point. So back in our project, I want to first look at how to create the UI elements so that we can enable the Steam functionality. So under the game scene, let's create a new control, call it Steam HUD. And let's just move it right under the multiplayer HUD. And also let's zoom in on it a little bit so we can see what we're doing. So we're really just going to focus on this area of the game right now. Let's add a new panel. We're going to add a vertical box so we can put our buttons there. And I'm going to rename it options. So select the panel and click add child node. And we're going to add a scrollable container. And next, let's add another vertical box container. And we're going to rename the scroll container to lobbies. We're going to add 2 buttons under our options. So let's add a button, Control D or Command D to duplicate it. We'll name this one host P2P game. And the second one we'll name list lobbies. Select the Steam HUD, layout, transform. And let's set the size to 120 by 100. And then let's move it to -110, -36. You'll notice that it's way above the old panel. So let's go ahead and move that one so it's more in line with it. So I'm going to just close the visibility on the Steam Hub for a minute so that I can see the multiplayer HUD clearly. Select the layout, transform. We're going to set the size to 110 and 60. And then we're going to move it to -110 and then -36. So that should be right in line with the Steam panel. And as you can see, they're pretty close. And I think that'll be good enough. So I'm going to set the visibility to off on the multiplayer panel so I can see the Steam HUD better. Select the panel, layout, transform. We're going to set the layout mode to anchors. Select the anchors preset to full rectangle. And then we're going to set the size to 120, 120. Under the options, we'll select layout, transform. Set the size to 120, 40. And we're also going to set the layout mode to anchors and the anchor preset to full rectangle. For the button, let's give it a label, host P2P game. And you'll notice that the size is really big. We're going to adjust that in a second. And then under list lobbies, let's just apply the label list lobbies. Okay, now let's override the theme. We'll come under the fonts. I'm going to select quick load and we're going to load the fonts that came with the project. So pixel operator, and then let's set this font size to 8. And you'll notice that the list lobbies button is a little blurry right now. I'm not really sure what that is. It seems like there's a bug in how this font will show up, but it should work at size 8. Now, if I select 16, it looks nice and crisp. And if I select 8, it doesn't. So I'm going to revisit that in a moment, but let's go back to our host P2P game and let's go ahead and provide the same changes to the theme override. So font size, let's select 8, and we'll also select the same font, quick load, and then you can just select the pixel operator font, hit open, and you can see there that it cleaned itself up. So we're good to go there. So next under the lobbies panel, select layout and then transform. And we're also going to select the layout mode of anchors and full rectangle there. But we want to adjust the size a little bit. So let's move the Y to 80. We don't want it to take up the whole length of our panel here. And we also want to move it down a little bit to give room for our buttons. Otherwise, we won't be able to click on the buttons. So let's move it down to 37. And as you can see, it's out of the way of the buttons and we'll be able to correctly click on them. Now that we have everything in place, let's just go over what we're actually doing here. So we have a couple options here for the buttons. So host P2P game will allow you to host a Steam game, and we're going to wire that up. And then clicking list lobbies should show us all the lobbies available to the player so that when they select a lobby, they'll be able to join the game. Now, lobbies, if you look at, is underneath the buttons, but if you select options again, it actually covers the panel for the list of the lobbies. So we actually need to adjust the size a little bit. So if you click on the options again, and let's move the size down to 40. And now you can see it's out of the way of the lobbies panel there. So you'll be able to freely click on those buttons without interfering with each other. And before we get to the code, this Steam HUD alignment not being on top of the multiplayer HUD is kind of bothering me. So if we select this move tool, we can just move it slightly over so that they're both in line. So my plan is to not show the Steam HUD when you start the game. So let's go ahead and close that. And what I want to do is add one more button here called Enable Steam. Now you can approach this a couple different ways, but just to keep things simple, I'm just going to add a simple button here. So let's duplicate one of those buttons. Let's name it Use Steam. And then we can also label the button the same thing. Perfect. Okay, so make sure the Steam HUD is off by default because we don't want to show it. So when we click this Use Steam button, we'll hide the multiplayer HUD and then show the Steam HUD. Go under the Scripts tab. The first thing we'll do is open up the Game Manager script. Now this script holds all the signals for our user interface. So we've already wired up the host game and join as player 2. Now we just need to finish wiring up Use Steam and the other buttons that we have under our Steam HUD. So I want to do a little bit of cleanup first. Select the Join as Player 2 button. We're actually going to change this to Join as Client. If we go back to the 2D tab, you can see that the Join as Client looks good. Let's go back to our script and then let's rename this join as client. And then select the node tab, and we're gonna have to edit that connection, hit pick, join as client, hit OK, connect. So if we select the join as client and double click on the pressed signal connection there, it'll take us right to this function. So we know we did it right. Next, let's add a function for the use Steam button. And when we want to use Steam, we need to hide our multiplayer HUD. And then we need to actually show the Steam HUD. So click on Steam HUD, right click and select access as unique. And then control drag over and then type show. And then let's wire up that button, select use Steam. Need to edit because we duplicated it. We actually need to edit the underlying connection and then select use Steam, hit OK, connect. Great. Let's just test it really quick. Select use Steam. And there you go. It hides the multiplayer HUD. And now we can see the other two buttons for hosting P2P game and list lobbies, which of course do nothing right now. So let's stop that. Next, let's wire up the list lobbies button. Create a function called list Steam lobbies. Select the list lobbies button and the node tab, and we'll go ahead and double click on pressed. Select the game manager, hit pick, and we'll hit list Steam lobbies, hit OK, and connect. And as you can see with this green icon, we've successfully wired up the list Steam lobbies function to our list lobbies button. Now we do have a little bit more setup to do in this game manager script, but first we need to initialize our Steam network object. So in our file system browser, select the scripts folder, expand the scripts folder, and underneath the multiplayer folder, create a new folder called Steam. And in there, let's create a new script. Call it Steam Manager. Hit create, expand Steam, and open up the Steam Manager. So because we don't need any more than one Steam network initialized per client, we need to make this an auto load or a singleton. So go under the project settings, auto load tab, hit the little folder icon and find the script we just created under scripts multiplayer Steam, and then select Steam Manager and hit open. And then select the add button. And now you can see we have a autoloader called Steam Manager. Now we can access the Steam APIs from anywhere in the project using this autoloader. So if you need to make any changes to the initialization or anything, it's going to be in here. So in the Steam Manager autoloader script, we can delete the ready function and let's create a few variables that we'll need to use. Next, we're going to create an init function. This is similar to a constructor and it's going to be called once this object is initialized. So any kind of setup that we want to do immediately, let's just put it in here. In order to correctly use Steam, it has to be aware of the game's app ID or the game ID itself. So because we don't have an app ID, we have to use the test one that Steam provides us, which is this 480 up here. And you'll see that everywhere when you're looking at the documentation. A lot of times when you're just getting started, you can use the 480. And I'm going to touch on that more in a minute. And if we look back at the documentation under the introduction section for GodotSteam, and we'll scroll down a little bit, there's actually a few methods to make the underlying Steam library aware of your game's app ID. There's 3 methods that they outline in this documentation. We're going to go with the environment variables method, because I think it's the easiest to use and it's probably more likely what you'll actually use in production. So we're going to set 2 environment variables for the game and app ID respectively, so Steam knows which app you can use. Now in production, when you actually have a game register on Steam, you would replace this 480 with your game's app ID. So now we need to set them as an environment variable so the Steam library knows which game app ID to use. And then just copy that again, and then we'll change Steam app ID to Steam game ID. And that's all we have to do to set the environment variables. Under the process function, we're going to call Steam run callbacks. And what this will do is make sure that everything that's received from the Steam APIs, any kind of callbacks or signals that get executed behind the scenes, this is going to make sure they get ran and executed. So if you're querying for data or you're receiving updates because a player joined the lobby or that sort of thing, this is going to make sure that all of those callbacks function properly. So we need to just put it in a process function just like this. Now let's initialize Steam. We're going to use Steam init x. and then type initialize response. And this will give us an idea of whether or not Steam correctly initialized, but we actually need to check for real. So under here, we're going to look at that response's status. So just copy that. We're going to look at the status key. And if it's anything other than 0, that means we have a problem. And if that happens, we'll print out an error message here and we'll just quit the game. And the reason we quit the game is because we don't want to run if there's something wrong with Steam. Now, for this example, we're just going to kill the game if there's a bad startup with the Steam initialization. You may want to handle this more gracefully. It just depends on your setup. But this is taken directly from the GodotSteam documentation, so I'm just going to roll with that. Now, if we make it here, we know that we are correctly initialized. So let's grab the isOwn variable. Look for isSubscribed. Let's grab the Steam ID. And of course, the Steam username. Steam, and then to get the username, it's going to be get persona name. Now, if you're wondering where this Steam library came from, well, it's because we're using that MultiplayerPeer pre-compiled build of Godot. Normally what you would want to do if you just wanted access to Steam on its own, you would just go to the asset lib, type in Steam, and then you would just add this extension to your game. And it would give you access to the Steam library as like an add-on under here underneath the resources folder. You'd have a resources add-ons folder and you'd have your whole Steam library there. But because we're using the compiled version, we don't see that. It's just built in. The get persona name is actually going to give you the Steam username of the Steam client that you're running. So this is like the Steam client that you run that has your games in it. Whatever username you use, that's what that's going to be. Let's print out our Steam ID. Just for debugging purposes. Now down here, we're going to check to make sure that the game is actually owned by the person playing the game. Now you may not want to include this for whatever reason. Maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you don't care where they get the game client. But if your game is listed on Steam, you can add a check here to make sure that they actually own the game. And if they don't, you can just quit the game. And we'll just add that same call to quit the game. Okay, so now we have our Steam initialization code done. So let's go back to the game manager script. And if we double check over on the 2D tab, you can see I have this use Steam button. So when someone clicks that use Steam, we know we're ready to initialize it. So let's make a call to initialize Steam here. Steam manager, which is our autoloader. Initialize Steam, great. Now when initialize Steam is called, it will make sure that Steam is up and running and we'll be good to go. Okay, so let's run a test to see what that's going to look like. Hit use Steam. What just happened? Okay, well, we have two debug clients running and one of them just closed and it just killed both of them. Okay, so what's happening is it's realizing that we don't have a Steam client running. So what I believe is happening is it's trying to initialize Steam, but because Steam isn't running, like we don't have our Steam client running, it just kills the game immediately so fast that we don't even get this print statement. So this is provided by the example documentation, but it kind of doesn't work in this case, or maybe it works if you have logging enabled and you have a standalone version of it. I'm not really sure there, but to make this work, you have to launch Steam. So go ahead and launch Steam on your computer. Great, so now that we have Steam running, let's try to run it again. Hit use Steam and look at that. You can see, did Steam initialize correctly? Status of 0. We have no messages or warnings down here, so that looks good. And then you'll have your Steam ID printed out down here. Okay, so let's close that. So now that we have our Steam initialized, we need to be able to select which network we want to use. Do we want to use the ENet one, the default one that comes with Godot, or do we want to use this Steam network that we've added to our project? So in order to be able to select which one of those we want to use, I want to create a common file called network manager where we can select and build out the different network types. And it'll also help us consolidate some of the functionality that we see used here on this script here. So let's start out by adding some folders to our project structure. So go under scenes, and let's add a new folder called multiplayer. And then let's add one underneath that and we'll call it networks. Then I want to create two scenes to handle the respective networking functionality, one for the ENet and one for Steam. So let's create two scenes of type node, which we have selected, and we'll name the first one ENet. network. Let's create another scene called Steam network. Okay, so we have two scenes there, and they're both nodes. And then let's scroll down to the script section, and underneath the multiplayer folder, let's create another folder called networks. And we're going to add some scripts that will map to those scenes we just created. So the first one, let's call it ENet network. Let's create another one called Steam network. And then we're going to create a network manager, which is the script that I was just talking about a minute ago. So before I forget, select the Steam network scene that we just created. And under the script, let's hit quick load. And we're going to look for Steam network. And then let's do the same thing with the E network. Quick load. And then you're going to select networks, ENet network. And we don't need those scenes so you can go ahead and close them. Next, let's create another node underneath the game scene. And let's call it network manager. Let's move it to the top, right under game manager. And let's also attach that network manager script we just created. Great. So we got all our scenes wired up and our nodes wired up, so we're good to go there. So instead of using this multiplayer manager, I'm going to start using the network manager. So first, let's select the network manager and give us unique access to it. And let's drag it down here. And you can see we're going to call become host on network manager. And we're going to do the same thing with our join as client function as well. So let's copy that, paste it in. And then we're also going to update the join as player 2 just to join as client. And then down under our list lobbies, let's also stub out that function as well. And we actually want to hide our Steam HUD once we've selected become host or join as client. So let's also hide that here in both become host and join as client. And we have one more place to add the network manager call to become host, and we'll just replace it with the one up here. And I'm going to leave a note for myself to come back to this later on. Okay, so let's open up that network manager script. And we can remove these functions. And let's add 3 references to the scripts that we just created. So what was it? Become host, join as client, and list lobbies. So I've just stubbed out some functions here, but the problem with calling become host or join as client for whichever network we're using is there's no way to tell right now which one we're actually using. So we need to add a mechanism so that we can toggle between using the Steam one or the ENet one. So let's add a couple variables to help. So I'm going to add a new enum called multiplayer network type with enum and Steam respectively. And let's add a variable to track which active network we have set. And we'll set it to default to the ENet one. And then we need references to the 2 scenes that represent those different network types respectively. You can probably just type ENet and it should filter down to it. Yep. And let's do the same thing for Steam. And then we also want to track which network we have selected. So let's create an active network variable. So how do we select which type to use? So if we go back to our game manager, we know if they don't want to use Steam, it will just be set to the ENet network by default, which is fine. So we only really need to worry about when we want to use Steam. So we already have this use Steam function. So let's just set the active network to Steam once this is hit. Let's grab a reference to the network manager, active network type, active network manager, and then let's grab a reference to the enum, and then we'll set it to Steam. So then any actions that we do on Steam, like listing the lobbies or joining a lobby, we know the network that will be used is Steam. But we also need to build out those networks. So let's go back to our network manager script. Let's create a function to build out the active network that we want to use. We only care to do this if we don't have an active network. We don't want to keep reinitializing the network if we already have one, like subsequent calls to list lobbies or something like that. leaving myself a to-do to come back to. Let's create a match case statement here to match on the different enum types. So let's first do ENet. And let's do a match on Steam. And then our default case, we'll just print out no matching type. Let's add a print statement for setting the ENet network type. Let's do it again for Steam. Great. And we have some shared functionality. So let's create another function called setActiveNetwork. And what we're going to do here is for each one of the network types, we're going to make a call and pass in the respective scene. So under the ENet case, we're going to set the active network to ENet. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for Steam, but using the Steam scene. And the reason why we're using Steams to represent the different network types is because it needs access to the tree or the active game tree to perform some functionality. So now that we pass in our network scene, we need to initialize it. Instantiate. Now let's set the active network to the instantiated scene. And then we actually need to set the player spawn node. Now remember back in our scene, on our game scene, we have this node down here that represents where the multiplayer players will be spawned into the game. Our active network needs access to that as well. Now we haven't created that object in here yet, so let's go ahead and do that. And if we go back to the top of our game scene and select our network manager, you'll see that export field has appeared. And let's just drag over that player's object. And then once we have our active network scene initialized, let's go ahead and add it to the network manager node over here. Great, so now let's just call this build multiplayer network each time one of these network functions are called. And the reason why we're able to do that is because these functions are only going to be called once. Like you're not going to join multiple clients. And if you need to do that, well, you're going to have to edit your game to support that functionality. The only time this is called multiple times is like if you want to refresh your lobby list. And that's why we double check to make sure we have an active network or not before we go through and set the network again, because we don't want to be resetting it up. And the way I want to design this is I want to be able to call the same subsequent function on our active network script. So it'll be active network, become host, join as client, and list lobbies respectively. So each network implementation like eNetwork or Steam will have its own version of what the list lobbies functionality will look like or joining or becoming a host. Oops, got a typo. The next thing I want to do is set up both the eNet and Steam networks. So if you remember that multiplayer manager script from the last few videos, it basically handled everything that we needed. It created our eNetwork, created our callbacks and our multiplayer server peers or client peers respectively. You know, if you click join as player 2. So we're going to do something similar, but it's going to be a little different for the Steam version. So we're going to create two different versions of this. So we've already created the scripts to stub them out with Steam network and ENet network, which I believe I closed. So let's open ENet network back up. Okay, so we have ENet network, we have our Steam network, and then this multiplayer manager. So what we want to do first is let's just copy paste everything that's in the multiplayer manager script. And we're going to move that underneath the eNetwork. Because remember, the multiplayer manager script from our last example was the one that did the eNetwork stuff. So we're basically just going to replace everything in here. And we're going to do some edits to it. First thing I want to do is move the ENet MultiplayerPeer to a class level variable. And we'll create a new one. And let's go underneath the become host. We actually can remove this call. And where it says create server, let's replace server peer with multiplayer peer and do the same thing with the line of code beneath it when we're setting the server peer. And then we need to do the same thing on the client side. So let's remove that. And let's also change the client peer variable to multiplayer peer and as well down there. And I think we renamed this function. So let's change it to join as client. Remember back in our network manager script, we are using join as client, just to keep it consistent. And the next thing I want to do is remove the setup for the player spawn node out from the individual network setups, because if you look back at our network manager, we're going to do that for them. So they don't need to know where that player spawn node is. But it's still important to have that reference so we can actually add a player to the game or remove them when they leave. The next thing I want to do to clean up is let's remove all these variables. We're going to move them somewhere else. And of course, they're not going to work anymore. So let's cut those out of there. And one more thing before I get out of this class is let's move this remove single player functionality to another script. And if we come down here, let's grab this function. And back under our game manager, I'm going to stick it at the bottom there. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so I think our ENet network script is all set up. So let's go ahead and build out the Steam version of the same thing. So what we want to do is grab all this up to the multiplayer scene and then select the Steam network script. Let's just paste it in. Right off the bat, we need to make a few changes. We're no longer going to be using the ENet MultiplayerPeer. We're going to be using this SteamMultiplayerPeer. So if you remember from earlier, this SteamMultiplayerPeer is the magic that allows us to seamlessly go from using Godot high-level multiplayer APIs to a Steam network behind the scenes. Now we have a reference to this because we're using that pre-compiled MultiplayerPeer. Remember, we downloaded this version, whichever version of your OS, and we launched that pre-compiled version. That pre-compiled version that we've opened our project into is what allows us to have access to this. Now you could go under the asset lib, type in Steam. You have access to a asset version of it, but I haven't had a chance to play around with that yet. So if you want, you could technically not use a pre-compiled version and just add these two extensions to your project and have the same type of functionality. I just really wasn't able to get the SteamMultiplayerPeer version up and running just yet, but I'm going to come back to that in another video. And if you'd like to see me do that as well, let me know in the comments. So now that we've got our updated MultiplayerPeer type, let's go ahead and make a couple changes. We need to get rid of this create server and let's replace it with create lobby. We're going to use that SteamMultiplayerPeer object and set the lobby type. And if you notice, there were several different lobby types: invisible, private, and friends only. You can adjust this to meet your game's requirements. For now, I'm just going to use public. And then we need to set the maximum players for the lobby, and I'm going to just set it to 4 for now. And then under join as client, we don't create client anymore. We actually connect lobby. So let's do MultiplayerPeer, get rid of that and say connect lobby. And then we're going to pass in the lobby ID. And you might be wondering, where are we getting a lobby ID? Well, we need to add that. So under join as client, let's add a parameter for lobby ID. And then let's change our little debug message to joining lobby. So, but that would mean we need to add a lobby field to our join as client function, and you would be correct. So let's go back to our network manager, and under join as client, we need to pass in the lobby ID. And then we also need to pass it into join as client here. And because our ENet doesn't support lobbies right now, I'm just going to set a placeholder to 0, and then we can just ignore it and the call underneath the eNetwork implementation. Let's go back to the eNetwork implementation and add lobby ID to the join as client function. But we're basically just going to ignore it. Now you don't have to ignore it. Like, you can actually create a lobby system that doesn't use Steam. And I actually have a few videos on it if you want to go check those out here. So if you wanted to put a lobby system based on some other technologies, you can do that and pass in the lobby IDs here and parse out which lobby the player wants to join here. Now, I'm not going to do that here because that's way out of scope for this. So for now, we're just going to ignore the lobby ID. So let's take a quick peek back at the game manager script where we had join as client. We actually need to make some updates here because you'll notice that we're not actually passing a lobby ID. So if we come back to the network manager script, we'll need a lobby ID to get passed into there. But first we need to actually get the lobby. But before that, let's actually set up how to host a game first, because we can't have any lobbies without hosting a game. So go back to our Steam network class, and then underneath the join as client, let's create another onLobbyCreated function. So what we need to do is connect this callback onLobbyCreated when you actually create a lobby. So when you hit become host, it just makes a request to create a lobby. You don't actually have it yet. But once this onLobbyCreated callback is hit, the lobby is active at that point, but we still need to wire up the signals. So let's create our ready function. And let's get a reference to our MultiplayerPeer, and let's wire up that signal. Look for lobby created. Let's connect it to that function onLobbyCreated that we just created. Great, so once a lobby is created, it will call down to here. And then now what we'll do is if connect is anything other than 1, we just ignore it. Here we need to grab a reference to the lobby. So we'll create a variable called hosted lobby ID equal to lobby ID. But we haven't created it yet, so let's go ahead and create one. Okay, now that's been created. Let's print a debug statement. Then let's make sure our lobby is joinable. Oh, we actually have to pass in our hosted lobby ID. Okay. This should be set by default once the lobby is created, but just to be sure, we set it to true here. And then we need to add some data like the name and the mode of the lobby. And let's copy paste that again. And instead of name, we're going to set it to mode. And then instead of lobby name, let's set to mode. And we got to create these really quick. I'm going to name my lobbies bad for now. And then lobby mode will just be co-op. So I'm going to recommend that you always name your lobby something specific that's easily filterable, because you're going to be starting out by using the test game with our Steam ID that we talked about earlier, and you're going to have a lot of stuff in there. So it's just best to give it a unique name so that you can filter on when you need to actually display the lobbies for the players later on. So this will create a lobby for us so that other players can join, but now we need to be able to get those lobbies. So let's create a function called listLobbies. And we're going to add a distance filter, and I'm just going to set it to default. You may need to change this based on your requirements, but default will work for this demo. And then let's go ahead and kick off a request for the lobby list. So this request will get kicked off, but it won't go anywhere. It has nowhere to send that data. So we need to create a callback for that list data to go to. So back under our game manager, let's wire up a callback. And the reason why we do it in the game manager is because we're going to display them in the UI. And this is kind of where I have all the UI code. And we only need to wire this up really when we're using Steam. So we can just put it under this use Steam button functionality. So select lobby match list, and let's connect it to another function called onLobbyMatchList. And let's create that function. And that function is going to get a list or an array of lobbies. So now when our Steam network has been told to kick off a request to get the list of lobbies, it will actually be populated back into this function onLobbyMatchList. And the array of lobbies will be sent in there. So that means when we call list Steam lobbies, we'll make a call to the network manager list lobbies function, which we have here. We'll get our network type because it'll be built here, which in this case will be Steam. And then we'll make a subsequent call to that network's implementation of list lobbies, which is right here. Okay, so I think we have our Steam network complete, and I think we have our eNetwork complete. Now let's go back to the game manager and finish up the functionality there. And before I forget, let's add some calls to remove single player. So each time you become a host or join as a client or join a lobby, you need to remove that single player. So let's just go ahead and add those calls under become host and join as client. And one more if you decide to be a dedicated server. So next I want to do is let's actually list the lobbies in our UI. So when we click on our list lobbies button, we'll make a call to this list Steam lobbies, and then we'll call that list lobbies function that we talked about a second ago. But all the lobbies are going to come in here, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So let's display them in our UI. First, let's clear out the list of lobbies in case you hit the button a couple times. We just want to make sure we don't have duplicates in that list. Grab a reference to the lobbies vertical box container. Let's get the children. Nope, not child, children. And then we'll just run a queue free on each of them. Let's create another for loop. We're going to loop over all the lobbies we got back from our request. Let's grab the lobby name. Pass in the lobby, and then let's get the name key out of there. Remember, we set name and mode earlier. And what I'm going to do here is filter on lobby name. So I just want to add an important note here. Because you're using the test game that everybody else in the world is going to be using to develop their game out, like during development, you're going to want to filter on name. So give your game during testing a unique name so that you can make sure that you're only getting those ones. So I want to say if lobby name is not equal to empty, and also if lobby is equal to, what did I say, bad, something like that. You may want to add a filter like that because number one, you're going to get a ton of lobbies without any names, and you don't want that polluting your game while you're testing. And also you want to filter on name to make sure that the ones that do have names, you don't need to see those because there is a lot of stuff in there and it gets a little hairy. So I would recommend filtering off any empty names and make sure it matches the lobby name that you have set in your game list. But I want to take off my filter on my name for now because I'm going to show you that there's actually lobbies in there. Next, we need to create a button so that we can click on the lobby you want to join. Let's set the text. And I'm going to set it to the lobby name. Put a pipe in the middle. And then the mode. Did I forget to get the mode? I did forget to get the mode. Okay, so let's grab the mode. So once we have the lobby name that we care about, let's grab the mode. And again, we just use those calls to get lobby data. I'm going to set the size of the button. And let's override the font size. Next, we're going to create a font variation so that we can change the font type. And then I'm going to select the pixel operator font that we got with the project. Next, let's override the font with the one we just set up. Let's give the button a name. Let's set the button alignment. And then next we need to connect a signal so that when the button is pressed, we have it go to a function to actually join the lobby. So when the button is pressed, we create a callable to self, and we're going to target a function called join lobby. And then we need to bind the data of this lobby to it. So we do that by passing in the lobby object in the for loop. Okay, so now that we've created a button, we need to add it to the vertical box container. And that should do it. So now when we have our lobbies come in, they should just populate the lobby list right underneath here. So I think we might be able to test that really quick. So let's run a test. Use Steam with lobbies. Oh, I have a bug. Uh-oh. Okay, so it's complaining about this. Let's see, what are we doing? So we set active network, passing in the networks. Oh my, okay. So I was passing in the scripts and not the scenes. Hopefully somebody caught those early on. So let's change these to scenes. And we want to use the scenes network. There we go. Okay. So then we'll just fix that to scenes. Perfect. Okay. So let's try it again. List lobbies. Great. So here's all the lobbies that we got from around the world right now. Again, it's a lot of junk you got to filter through. So I'd recommend filtering on the name of the lobby that you're creating for your game when developing this out. Okay, but before we actually can select a lobby to go back into our game manager script, we actually need to create this join lobby function. So let's create another function called function join lobby. And of course, this function is going to get a lobby ID. And I'm just going to default it to 0. And when we join a lobby, we actually want to do everything that's done in this join as client script. So I'm going to just copy everything up here and just say join lobby. So we don't have to duplicate that code. And of course, we're going to remove a player. We're going to hide both UIs or the HUDs for those. And then we're going to make a call to our network manager to join a client. But we have to pass in the lobby ID as well. So let's pass in that. And now you know why I set this to 0, so that these calls from the join as client from the non-Steam network side can just call to this join function without any problems. While we're in here, let's go over to our Steam HUD panel, select the host P2P options, node tab. We also need to wire up this press function. And we're going to just select game manager. We're going to go to the same become host function. So both the host P2P game and host game for the regular network setup are going to use the same function. We need to do a little bit more code cleanup before we're ready. So select this multiplayer manager. Remember, we copied everything out of here. Well, we really don't need anything in here anymore because we moved it to individual network implementations. So I'm just going to select up to here and delete everything. And of course, we don't need any of this stuff either. But I'm still going to use the multiplayer manager as a nice way to hold the couple states we have in our game, like host mode enabled or multiplayer mode enabled, and the respawn point. These are just kind of like generic things that we need to use throughout the game. So I just figured I'll just leave these in here for now. But we also have to set them in their correct areas. So we removed all the calls out of our main game manager script. But if we go to the network manager script, I left a to-do for us here. Let's go ahead and set this multi-manager is multiplayer mode enabled to true. Because I figured anytime you have a multiplayer game, it's going to need to go through here first. So let's just set it to true here. So we need to use it in one more place. So let's grab a reference to the multiplayer manager. And under this host mode, I'm going to set host mode to true here. But we don't want to have host mode in a dedicated server setup, right? So if you remember, we come back under our game manager, we're using the same become host call. We don't need it to be in host mode and dedicated server mode, right? It's just a server running as a dedicated server. There's not a host involved. There's not like a local client also playing on the server. So I'm going to pass in a variable. We're just going to say true to represent a dedicated server, and I can remove that to do. We come back to our network manager. We need to add a parameter in the become host that says is dedicated server. We're going to default it to false because we don't want to be passing it all the time. So I'm going to say we're in host mode when not a dedicated server. So let's just do that check really quick. So if is dedicated server equals false, then we'll go ahead and set it to true. Otherwise, we're going to set it to false. So that's just some little bit of cleanup that I wanted to do. And host mode and multiplayer mode were things that we had added in the last couple videos. So if you want to know where to use those, go check those videos out. Okay, at this point, let's do another test. Let's just try regular mode first to make sure we didn't break anything. So I'm going to click host mode and then join as client. And you can see my animations, everything are working correctly. I click up here and on this client, everything looks good. Great. Okay, now let's select the Steam mode instead. So we'll hit use Steam and I'm going to list lobbies just to see. Okay, we got our lobbies. Now I want to host a game. Oh no, we've got a crash. Where are we crashing? Oh, silly bug. Gotta put a %s in front of that. Okay, let's rerun it. Use Steam, host P2P game. And look at that, we're hosting our first Steam P2P game. You can't really tell though, right? So if we go under here and hit use Steam, list lobbies, let's scroll down. Oh, look at that. There's our lobby, bad, and then the mode co-op. So if we select that, what do you think is gonna happen? Well, we get a bug. Some of you may be already aware of what's gonna happen, but you cannot add a peer that is used. So this was the problem that I originally talked to in the very beginning of the video where you can't test on the same computer with the same Steam client running, right? So I have Steam running behind the scenes, but it's going to be the same player. So you have to do an export and put it on another computer to be able to correctly test this. So I think we need to do that. So I'm going to show you how to export a project. So if you look back at the documentation under the tutorials tab, there is a exporting and shipping section. And they basically want you to put in a template that maps to this custom version of Godot, right? So you're going to have to do that if you want to be able to ship this correctly. Otherwise, you're not going to have access to Steam or that sort of thing. So you remember when I told you to download these templates? You know, of course you had to download whichever operating system you're currently working on, but you also need to download these templates so that we can export the game with Steam and the MultiplayerPeer support. So go to wherever you downloaded them and they're going to look something like this. Okay, so you have your like Mac OS support and you have your support for Windows and Linux and so on. So, and each one represents a debug or a release version. And the instructions actually say to don't use the debug mode, but I actually was able to use it and it worked fine. So maybe their documentation is dated. So what we need to do is based on which computer you're going to export it for. I'm going to export it for Windows. So I'm going to go under export. I'm going to add another Windows desktop, and I'm going to select the release. So now that I found the folder where I have those templates, you can see it's narrowed them down to the ones that are applicable to a Windows build. So I'm going to select the release one so it doesn't say debug, and I'm going to do a 64 because that's my type of computer. I'm going to hit open, and I'm going to export project. You have to uncheck this export with debug. It won't work, at least in the release mode. It just won't work. I don't know what else to say. It just won't ship with Steam correctly. So I'm going to just name it first game. I have a Windows client folder saved already, and I've already got some exports here, and I'm just going to overwrite them. Let's launch the game. And I'm going to use Steam and host P2P game. And so now I'm just going to sit there. You just watch until you see another player drop in. I need to transfer the export to my other computer. Okay, so just so you guys see how this works, I'm going to copy this whole entire Windows client folder. So this contains the entire build for the game that for the export that I just built. So I'm going to copy this entire Windows client folder over to my Windows computer. And whenever this finishes, I'm going to start it on the Windows computer, and I'm going to select use Steam and then list lobbies, and then select the bad lobby there in the list. And you should see another player drop in. Okay, so that client has been transferred. So I'm going to go start it on my Windows computer. Be right back. And look at that. First try, the other client dropped in. So here's my local player jumping around, and let me go jump around on the other player client. Awesome. Awesome. So that movement that you just saw was from my Windows computer over a Steam P2P network hosted on this Mac, connected to some Steam network, and then now piped in to my Windows client. So now we saw a full working example. This library is in alpha, so there's probably going to be some bugs to shake out. I gave you a very straight golden path example of how to get this working. So you may have to make some adjustments to get it working correctly in your game. The guys behind this are truly amazing. The work behind GodotSteam and this MultiplayerPeer plugin. There's a couple efforts by a couple developers, and I'm going to link their information down in the description. So please go support those guys and start those repositories. Let them know that you want to work on it. Now, you could stop here and you can end the video, but before we go, I want to add one more touch to this, and I want to be able to show usernames over the top of the players based on who you are. This Steam API, like I said, is limited, and we don't have access to their usernames in a way that I thought would be usable. So what I'm going to have to do is create a replication or a synchronized variable for the username on both the client side and on the authority side, and then have those things kind of synced back and forth. So I'm going to do that really quick. So feel free to drop off now, or if you want to see how I do that, let's just look at how to do that. And we're gonna have to do another build too and everything. So let me just bail out of here. So I know I said we weren't gonna make any changes to the underlying code, but for this, to get the username working, we have to. So let's open the multiplayer controller really quick. And at the top, we need to add a variable for username. And then over in the multiplayer scene, so let's open up the multiplayer player scene. And at the bottom down here, let's add a new label. Let's call it username. And then we also need to open the multiplayer input script. And at the top, let's add another variable for username. And I know this seems redundant, but again, I had to go from client to server and then back again to be able to synchronize the usernames across all clients. There's probably a better way to do this. Maybe once I have access to the usernames on the server side, like once a player joins a lobby, I didn't really see a way to get all the players' data in the lobby in a way that would help for this. So if you know a solution for that, please let me know and I will undo this here. But this is what we got to work with for now. This is all I found. If I find a better solution, hey, development's iterative. We can just make improvements as we go. So username equals, let's get our Steam manager, and we're going to get the Steam username. So let's go look at that really quick to refresh our memory. So remember, the first thing we did is we set the Steam username when we were initializing Steam, and we're setting it to the get persona name. So this input script is going to run on your local client. So the local version of the game you're running. So we're going to set it on our local player's authority, right? So this is like the input authority. It's the client has authority. So we're going to set the username there, but we also need to add a replication of that same username variable. So let's say input synchronizer, and then we're going to say user name, can't type. Okay, so we're going to synchronize the username. And the reason why we synchronize it is because we're going from client to server authority. So back in our controller, we need to be able to pull off that client set username. So for now, I know this isn't best practice, but just for now, we're going to apply it underneath our apply movement from input. So let's do username equals input synchronizer username. Now, again, this isn't best practice. This is just to show you guys that it's actually two different players playing. And I thought this would be pretty cool to do. So in our apply movement from input, that's our server side. We're actually setting the username from the input synchronizer that was synced to the server. However, we also need to synchronize the username in the player script as well, or the player object as well. So let's go ahead and paste in username so that all the other clients can also see what your username is. So we need to do another check down in our physics process. So underneath the not server side, so this is like on the same area where we want to apply animations. We're going to do a check for username. Oh, I forgot to add my username label to the top. So let's go back up to the top really quick. And right above the username, let's add a onReady call to username label. And let's get access to our username. And let's go back to where we just were. So if username label is good and username is not equal to an empty string, we're going to go ahead and set it. Okay, so this username is the player's username that was set from the player client authority to the server authority. And then that also was synchronized here. And then we synchronize that back to all the other clients. So I think this will work. Let me just double check. So if we run the game, we'll use Steam. Let's host a game. And there it is. Look at that. Battery acid dev. Awesome. Now, I'm not going to spend the time to move that around or center. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do it really quick because it'll take 2 seconds. So if we scroll in, I think we can hit F and zoom in. Let's just take this label and I want to select the move. And I think I can just shift it over a little bit. Actually, let's move it above his head. Let's also center the text. And let's try to rerun it really quick to just see what it looks like now. I'm going to use Steam. I'm going to host a game. Oh, it didn't really work the way I thought it would. Yeah, so go under layout and do full rect, and that will center it the way I expect it. And then because it's full rect now, we have to adjust it to right above his head. And that looks pretty good. All right. So now I think we can do a build and it should be synchronized between the different clients of the game. So I'm going to re-export my client for Windows. Just overwrite everything, hit OK. Let's close that out. Now let's run the game again. I'm going to get a lobby ready, use Steam, host P2P game, and now I'm in. Okay, so let's see if the other guy drops in. Oh, first I have to transfer the build over to the other machine. And there it is. My other Steam player dropped in, moves for scale. You can see he's jumping around there. So we know we have our synchronization working, and that is amazing. Let's go check one thing. Let's hop over to the platform and let's make sure we can both land on it correctly. Awesome. And it looks like it's synchronizing perfectly. Amazing. Okay, so we have our Steam network complete. We've got our username showing up with some synchronization, I would say hacks at this point. I think there's a better way to do it. Really to go from here is to, build out your lobby system. If I hit this use Steam and list lobbies, you'll see that my lobby does still show up. It's still available. So everything in this setup is using lobbies right now. And I did hear the rumor is that they're going to move away from the lobby system more to a more socket approach. So I think that's going to be better for the long run. So we don't have to be stuck in the lobby system. Now, the asset that was developed by this person over here for the SteamMultiplayerPeer, I'll link down in the description. That doesn't use lobbies. So if you can get that working, I would actually prefer that over the way that we did it today, like over using the custom build. think it feels a little funny using a custom build of Godot to do something like this, but I wasn't able to get it working. But I'm going to circle back around to that. And again, let me know down below if you do want me to explore that a little bit more. I think that's a better approach. But again, so we have, some Steam network with P2P video games set up in. You've got 2 players able to play on there. I can't control it from this scene because this is my single player side, right? And it's literally on my Windows computer behind me. I wonder if I can show you guys. Okay, so it looks like my microphone's in a way. Let me lower this out of the way. But you can see in the background, it's being synchronized on my Windows computer. And let me see if I can jump and you can, you can. So I'm on my Mac, I'm hitting jump and you can see the player jumping and that player sitting on his platform back there. So you know that I've got this set up correctly. But again, lag is going to be a big problem here, I think. And I don't have these games optimized to work for lag just yet. So stay tuned. I plan on tackling some of the lag issues over the next couple of weeks. I don't know how long that's going to take me. I've just started doing my research on it and building out some solutions for that. So let me know what you guys want to see. This is one implementation version of Steam. I think it's really powerful. I think it's really cool that you can just develop everything using the high level APIs and then with a switch, just basically be on a P2P network. I think that's going to be a really amazing thing to have. If that doesn't work for you, like you want to use the lower level networking tools that Steam provides, you can also do that and not use this at all. And you can use GodotSteam to handle all that functionality for you. So I just thought this was a really cool implementation and I'm excited to see this get built out and moved in production because there's a lot of people that are making pretty simple games that don't need access to lower level APIs and sending individual messages and that sort of thing that can just use the high level tools like spawning and synchronization and RPCs and have this amazing gameplay. And again, this will already work right away. Like there is going to be some lag, but if you're making a card game or some really slow paced game, it won't really matter. You can use this right now and it shouldn't be a problem. But again, it is an alpha. So go show your support for those developers and those teams. I'm going to leave links down below in the description. And if you want to see more or let me know if there's something I touched on today that you'd like me to expand upon, please let me know down below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. It is greatly appreciated. Stay connected. Thanks for watching.